Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. The latest Roy Morgan Weekly indicators show little change last week, especially on the political front. The ALP's strong two-party preferred lead is unchanged, with the ALP on 56% compared to the Coalition on only 44%, a lead of well over 10 percentage points. Government confidence this week was also unchanged at 95.5, still just below the neutral level of 100, with more Australians saying the country's heading in the wrong direction, 44.5%, than the right direction, unchanged at 40%. However, on the economic front, last week's small increase in consumer confidence following the Reserve Bank's decision to keep interest rates on hold was reversed. This week, the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Rating was down 2.1 points to 77.2, as discussion turned to the Reserve Bank's interest rate decision next month, which may well be another increase. Consumer confidence has now been below 80 for 7 straight weeks since early March, the first time this has happened since consumer confidence became a weekly index in October 2008. The last time consumer confidence spent an extended period well below 80 was in the 1990-91 recession, when the index, which was then conducted on a monthly basis, spent 5 straight months at a very low level below 80. The latest weekly ANZ Roy Morgan inflation expectations were up 0.5% to 5.6% this week. This is the third week of April. Australians now expect inflation to average about 5.6% annually over the next 2 years. Now, inflation expectations have jumped around somewhat in recent weeks as different influences, including the Reserve Bank interest rate decisions, play out. However, the measure has now averaged at 5.6% over the last 6 weeks. Next week, the ABS is set to release both its March quarter CPI and latest monthly inflation indicator, also for March. These two measures will play a large role in determining whether the Reserve Bank keeps interest rates unchanged or resumes hiking at its next meeting in early May. Now, if you're feeling like there's a bit of a time warp, you're right. Roy Morgan is reporting April figures while we wait for the ABS to report March figures. As a reminder, Roy Morgan's inflation expectations for March were up 0.3 percentage points to 5.6. The same as the latest weekly figure, the first monthly increase for 4 months since November 2022. We've seen the ANZ Roy Morgan Inflation Expectations Index lead the ABS monthly inflation figures throughout the past 3 years. As inflation expectations trended higher, the ABS quarterly CPI then followed just months later. So the sustained increase in inflation expectations over the past 6 weeks means we may be jumping the gun to assume inflation has been tamed after the Reserve Bank increased interest rates for a record 10 meetings in a row. The uptick we've seen in inflation expectations over the past 6 weeks suggests the Reserve Bank will have plenty of thinking to do at their next meeting. Turning to another important topic, one that Roy Morgan conducts extensive analysis on, and that's the gender gap in superannuation. Roy Morgan's data shows that over the last decade, the gender superannuation gap has closed, but only slowly. The average Australian woman now has around $154,000 in her superannuation, compared to around $216,000 for the average man. This means, on average, that women have only 71% of the amount of super that men do. But this is an improvement on a decade ago. In 2012, women had just under 65% of the amount of super that men did. So this is an increase of 6.5 percentage points in a decade. This means that if this improvement were to continue at the same rate, it would take another almost 50 years for the gender superannuation gap to be eliminated entirely. Surely we can find innovative policy solutions that will speed that process up. Now, the biggest factor driving the gender superannuation gap is clearly the disparate incomes that women and men have, the gender gap in income. An analysis of incomes by gender and age shows that women earn less than men at every single age group, even from 18 to 24, and then all the way through to people over 65. The smallest income gap is for younger women aged 18 to 24. They earn just over 85% of the income of their male counterparts of the same age. However, women aged 65 plus earn only around 70% of the income of men of the same age. We're talking here about working women and working men. One of the many factors driving this differential is the different rates of part-time work undertaken by women and men. Looking at the entire workforce, we see that nearly half of all employed women, around 45%, work part-time. In comparison, less than a quarter of employed men, 23.5%, work part-time. Over 3/4 of employed men work full-time. So closing the gender superannuation gap will require a broad range of reforms to Australia's superannuation system and to the way that it functions, and also the way we consider the role of work in driving a successful and productive society. All of these factors are involved and they're all interrelated. For more detail on Roy Morgan's latest release on the gender superannuation gap, click on the link below to read the in-depth article attached to this research, and feel free to reach out to Roy Morgan experts for more tailored information and assistance. And that's a wrap for this week. Subscribe free to our Roy Morgan YouTube channel for all the latest political, economic and market research data and insights. Thanks for listening today, and I look forward to bringing you the latest data on consumer confidence, inflation expectations and voting intention at the same time next week. Take care. See you next Wednesday after Anzac Day.